This is Algebra 2, Lesson 7.3, Vertex form. Now again, we had this on the first page, but just to reiterate, vertex form is going to have one set of parentheses with a power 2, and it could have a leading coefficient of 1, so sometimes you don't see a number here. But we talked about this one back in Lesson 5, maybe 5.3, but whenever you have your parabola, your quadratic, and you're going to slide it to the left or right, and then slide it up or down, the coordinates of the vertex are giving you the numbers to substitute into your formula at h and k. So we are going to solve these. And you actually already have all the tools to solve these. We solve similar equations in Chapter 6, maybe 6.3 and 6.4. But we're going to think about using PEMDAS. PEMDAS helps you evaluate expressions. Since we are solving, we do our PEMDAS backwards. So the first thing we need to do is add and subtract. Actually, this case, we don't have anything to add and subtract. You might say, well, there's a -8 in the parentheses, but parentheses come last. So same thing, multiply, divide. There's nothing to multiply and divide. Exponent. We have an exponent outside of our parentheses that we need to get rid of. To get rid of a power of 2, sometimes called a square, the opposite of square is square root. So we're going to square root the left and right side of this equation. On the left side, that leaves us with x minus 8. The square and the square root cancel each other out, and since there's nothing else left outside of the parentheses are gone. The square root of 256, you might say, is 16, but I would argue it's not technically 16, even if I click on my calculator and I say, what's the square root of 16? Oops, pretend I didn't do that. Square root of 256. My calculator says 16, but 16 times 16 is 256. That's right. But negative 16 times negative 16 is also 256. Your calculator just reports the first answer. It doesn't report both answers. And in this instance, you need both. So now that we got the exponent taken care of, we're into the parentheses, and the whole process starts over with addition and subtraction. So I have a subtraction, which I undo with a plus on both sides, but not just both sides, both numbers on both sides. So that leaves me with x is 24 and -8. You need to report both answers to get full credit on these. We can't just do the positive answer. Letter B, I'm going to do the same thing, but now I actually do have one that's going to use all of my steps of PEMDAS. So, first thing is add and subtract. I have a subtraction here that I undo with addition, plus 10 both sides. 5 stays 5, x plus 2 stays that, stays that, stays that, 10s are gone, and I have 57 on the right side. Next, we're going to undo our multiplication with a division. Divide by 5 on both sides. And this is probably the #1 spot that I actually see people get it wrong, because what they want to do is distribute. You cannot distribute this 5 into this equation. The power of 2 in PEMDAS is stronger than the multiply. Because this power 2 is here, you cannot do this. It is not allowed. So we're going to get rid of the 5 by dividing. That leaves us with x plus 2 squared, and that is 11.4. Next is the exponent. We undo a square with a square root, and that leaves me with x plus 2. The square root and the square cancel out, so I can drop the parentheses. I do not know that off the top of my head. I know it's 3 point something, but let's get a better answer than that. 3.4. We'll round it to 3.4. 3.4, but not just 3.4, also negative 3.4. After your root step, you always have the positive and the negative version of the answer. Next, we're going to do a -2, and I'm going to do that to both of my answers. Leaves me with x equals a positive 1.4 and a negative 5.4. Use your calculator if you need to with that arithmetic. Just make sure you're getting both answers every time. Letter B is vertex form. Now, when you're looking at an equation in general form, if I asked you to solve it, it's not really possible. You might think, well, I can minus 14 on both sides. Sure. But you can't divide by 6 on both sides because of the power 2. You can't square root on both sides because of the 6x. So we're going to take our equations in vertex form, change them, or sorry, in general form, change them to vertex form so that we can do all that amazing stuff we did in part A. Let's practice just the vertex form part right here. So we're going to start with our box. When we're going into vertex form, we only use the first two. We only put the x squared and the 6x in the box, which is different from factored form from the last lesson where you put all 3 in there. But we're going to start with x squared. We're going to start with 6x. We are not going to put the 14 in there. The identifying characteristic of vertex form is you have something twice. So we're going to do our 6x and we're going to split it into 2 equal pieces. You always divide it in half. And we're going to fill out our x and our 3 and our 3. And then for our bottom square, we know 3 times 3 is 9. So what I have on the side here is the same as what I have on the top here. So I'm going to write x plus 3, just like when we were doing factored form. But I'm not going to write it a second time. I'm just going to put power 2 because I have 2 of the same thing. Now all I've done is replace this with my x plus 3 squared. So my plus 14 is still there. But I also pulled this 9 out of nowhere. So I also need to make this equal to 9 to balance it out. Because by changing this to this, I added a factor of 9. So I'm going to balance my equation by putting a factor of 9 on the other side. If your goal is to write this in a y equals format, we're going to minus 9 to just bring these guys together. So I'll have y equals x plus 3 squared. And when I do 14 minus 9, I have a positive 5. And now this is my vertex form equation. Same thing on letter B, so we can try it again. We do x squared minus 16x. I only use my first 2 terms in there. Split that 16 into 2 equal pieces. Gives me a negative 8x and a negative 8x. That's x, negative 8, and a negative 8 times a negative 8 is a positive 64. So I have x minus 8 twice. I only replaced this and also introduced that extra 64. So now the plus 24 is still here. And because I added that extra factor of 64 by introducing the x minus 8 squared, I need to balance it out with a 64 on this side. We're going to do minus 64 on both sides to get rid of that. And stick that y equals in front. I got x minus 8 squared, and that will be minus 40. So for these last 2, I did provide boxes if you need to use them. But I'm going to show you guys how to do it without a box as well. I'm going to do both. So if I use the box, I got x squared and I got 7x. Just like what I did up top, I'm going to split it in half, and I'm going to split it in half. And that gives me x twice, 3.5 twice. So I can write this x plus 3.5 squared. Now, if you wanted to skip the box and just kind of do this work on the side, this number right here is always going to be half of your b term, half of the middle number. Okay? The minus 5 is still a minus 5, equals, and then if I take this number and I square it, 3.5 times 3.5, let's just use this. 3.5 times 3.5 is 12.5. That's going to go over here. 1225, yeah. So, without using the box, you really just take your b term, cut it in half. That's going to go in right here. Then you take that number and square it. That's going to go at the back. Once that's all set up, now you have to do the same steps from part A in solving it. Plus 5 both sides. x plus 3.5 squared is 17.25. Root both sides. $4.15 and negative 4.15. And last step is minus 3.5 and that leaves us with x equals 0.65 and negative 7.65. So I kind of went big on that one. I'm going to erase it to do letter B. Okay, so last one. X squared, 4x. Oh, I said I was going to do that. Let's pretend that this isn't even here. I can do that. I'm good at ignoring things. We're going to just take our 4x and we're going to split it in half. Keep the minus 8. And then we're going to take this number and we're going to square it. And here we just had a 0. So we put in, I erased it, but we put in the, what was that, 1225? We put in the 1225 at the end. Here, because I already have a number there, I'm going to add it to the number that's already there. So 2 times 2 is 4. 22 plus 4 gives me the 26. If you really like the boxes to help you figure this out, keep using them. If you don't really need them, all you're doing is, like I showed, cutting it in half. Come on. Come on. Come on. Well, let me erase that line. There it is. All you're really doing is cutting that b term in half and then squaring it and adding it to the end. So, last one, plus 8 both sides. Root both sides. Maybe 5 point something. $5.8 and negative 5.8, and finally minus 2 minus 2 both sides give me 3.8 and negative 7.8. That's it. Good luck on the exercises. If you have any questions, please let me know.